My name is Emily Carter. I'm 46 years old, and I live in a mid-sized town in the US with my two daughters, Lily, who's 17, and Sophie, who just turned 15. I wish I could tell you that we lived a quiet, peaceful life, but peace hasn't existed in this house for a long time. If you've ever wished you could serve cold, undeniable justice to people who try to shame, control, or destroy your family, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me, because what happened next not only exposed my ex-in-laws, but sent shockwaves through an entire church community. I married my ex-husband David when I was just 23. Back then, I believed in the storybook version of love, small town girl meets charming young man, and together they build a family. For years, that's what I thought we were doing. We had 2 beautiful daughters, a modest home, and we worked hard, but cracks started to show. David traveled often for work, and I started noticing how emotionally distant he'd become. Nights when he should have been home, he'd text that he was working late. His parents, my ex-in-laws, would cover for him, saying things like, "Oh, David is such a good provider. You should be more understanding." Those words used to sting, because what they meant was, stay quiet, play the obedient wife. Then, when Lily was 14 and Sophie was 12, my daughters were the ones who discovered the truth. They found messages explicit, undeniable between David and another woman. Not just a fling, a full-blown affair, and worse. That woman had given birth to not 1, but 2 little boys. When my daughters came to me with that evidence, crying and shaking, I felt my world collapse. But what hurt me most wasn't even the cheating, it was watching my girls' innocence shatter. They were forced to carry a burden no child should ever carry. When I confronted David, he didn't deny it. He didn't even apologize. He just said, "It happened, and they're my sons. You'll just have to deal with it." That's when I decided to file for divorce. I thought, fine, if you want that life, take it. But my daughters and I deserve better. But then came the car accident. David died before the divorce was finalized. The affair partner, his mistress, died too, leaving behind those 2 little boys, orphans, and that's when my ex-in-laws, Richard and Margaret, made their move. They were 78 and 80 years old, frail in appearance but vicious in spirit. They went to court, trying to gain custody of my daughters. Their logic? We lost our son, so we deserve the girls. But it didn't stop there. They also wanted to move into my home, yes, the very house I had worked for, paid for, and maintained while their son spent his money on secret hotel rooms. I said no. Absolutely not. That's when the war began. The weekend market has always been a special place for me and my girls. Fresh bread, jars of honey, flowers in mason jars. A place where life feels normal. For Sophie's 15th birthday, I gave her a little cash and told her she could spend it however she liked. Watching her run off giggling with her big sister, I thought, maybe we can still build happy memories. But an hour later, my phone rang. Sophie's voice was shaky, full of panic. "Mom, please come. There are women yelling at me. They won't let me leave." My heart dropped. Lily and I sprinted through the crowd until we saw it. 6 older women surrounding my daughter. Their faces twisted in disgust, spitting words at her. "How can you abandon your poor little brothers? God commands you to honor your grandparents. You're a selfish girl. Your father would be ashamed." Sophie was clutching her bag of candy like a shield, tears streaming down her face. Lily's fists were balled up, ready to fight. I stepped in, my voice shaking but loud. "Enough. Step away from my daughter." One woman sneered, "Maybe if you acted like a proper Christian wife, your husband wouldn't have strayed." Barf. I wanted to laugh in her face, but instead, I told Lily to take Sophie, pay for her things, and head to the car. I stood my ground as the women circled closer, their voices rising, their spit practically hitting my face. Eventually, the shouting grew so disruptive that the market organizers asked us not them to leave. Humiliating. But I gathered my girls. walked them to the car with those vultures following behind, and drove away. Inside the car, Sophie sobbed into her sister's shoulder. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Rage doesn't even begin to describe what I felt. It was something darker, something sharper, and that's when I knew they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 46 years old, and I live in a small town just outside of Dallas, Texas. My life has never been easy, but if you asked me a couple of years ago, I would have told you I had finally reached a point of stability. I had two beautiful daughters, Lily, 17, and Sophie, 15. I had a stable job as a project manager, and even though my marriage had crumbled because of my husband's betrayal, I thought at least I could give my girls a safe home and a fresh start. But betrayal has a way of echoing long after the person is gone. See, my ex-husband, David, wasn't just unfaithful, he was reckless, careless, and in his selfishness, he left behind a tangled mess of secrets, lies, and wounds that still cut my daughters and me every single day. He cheated on me for years with a much younger woman, and as if the infidelity itself wasn't bad enough, he fathered two sons with her. Two boys my daughters found out about before I did. That discovery, it shattered them. Imagine being a teenager and realizing your father, the man you still believed was your protector, not only betrayed your mother but built another family in the shadows. My girls were the ones who uncovered the messages, the late-night whispers, the photographs he had hidden in his phone. And when they finally broke down and told me, the look on their faces is something I will never forget. Pause. Softer, they felt guilty. My own children felt guilty for telling me the truth. And when I finally confronted David, when I filed for divorce, his parents, my ex-in-laws, didn't blame him. No, they blamed me. Even after David's sudden death in a car accident last year, the blame hasn't stopped. His mistress died in that same accident, leaving the two little boys orphaned. And instead of facing the truth of their son's betrayal, his parents decided to rewrite history. They painted themselves as victims, painted my daughters and me as villains, and demanded custody of Anna and Lily, as though I didn't exist, as though I wasn't their mother. But that wasn't enough. They also wanted to move in with us, into my home, into the space I had built to protect my girls and give them peace. I said no firmly, loudly, repeatedly. But saying no to them was like lighting a match in a field of dry grass. And then came the church. The church my ex-in-laws attended was small but loud, a conservative Christian congregation where gossip traveled faster than prayer, and appearances mattered more than truth. We had gone there in the early years of my marriage, before David's betrayal became impossible to ignore, and even back then, I could feel the judgmental stares, the whispers, the constant measuring of who was a good Christian woman and who wasn't. Spoiler alert, I was never good enough in their eyes. After David died, his parents leaned heavily on that church community. They spun their own narrative, one where they were heartbroken, abandoned elders, left penniless and homeless by their cruel daughter-in-law. And of course, their story gained traction, because people love tragedy when it's dressed up in biblical language. I should have expected that drama would eventually find its way to us. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened at the weekend market. The weekend market was supposed to be fun. It was Lily's birthday weekend, and since her party was planned later in the month, I wanted her to have a little freedom, a little joy. So I gave her some money and told her to buy whatever she wanted, mostly chocolate. Of course, a tea first. I was smiling, watching her run off with that teenage sparkle of independence in her eyes. But an hour later, my phone rang. Her voice was trembling, broken. Mom, please come. Some women, they won't let me go. They're saying things. I felt my heart drop. Anna and I sprinted through the stalls, past vendors calling out about honey jars and baskets of fresh strawberries, until we found her. There she was, my baby girl, surrounded. 6 older women had cornered her. Their faces were lined with disapproval, their mouths spitting venom. You're unchristian. One of them sneered, "For refusing to spend time with your grandparents." Another shook her head with exaggerated pity. A good big sister would be there for her poor orphan baby brothers. Lily was crying, her arms wrapped around the bag of sweets she had just bought, clutching it like a shield. I froze for a split second. Rage surged through me so fast it almost stole my breath. These women, these so-called Christians, they weren't there to comfort a grieving child. They weren't there to offer compassion. They were there to punish her, to shame my daughter into submission. I stepped between them and her, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it before. "And take your sister, pay for her things, and go to the car." My oldest nodded quickly, grabbing Lily's hand and leading her away. I kept my eyes locked on the group of women. "You want to come after me? Fine, I'm right here. But you do not ever go after my daughters." They didn't back down. If anything, they doubled down. One hissed, "You're worse than them. A wife should obey her husband's family. That's the Christian way." I laughed, a bitter, disbelieving laugh that made their faces twist. "Obey? You mean enable? You mean cover up his cheating? Protect his lies?" No thank you, but it didn't matter. The confrontation grew louder. Vendors turned to look. Voices rose, until finally, the market organizers asked us to leave. So I walked away, head high, my daughters waiting in the car, tears still streaking down their faces. And those women, those vultures, followed me, jeering until I shut the door and drove us home. That night, when my girls were asleep, I logged online. A friend from the church, a man who still respected me, told me the truth. My ex-mother-in-law had posted a sob story on Facebook. According to her, we were monsters. We had left them destitute, refused them access to their grandsons, and were turning the girls against their loving grandparents. And worst of all, she had fabricated a lie so grotesque it made my stomach churn. She told everyone that the affair partner, the woman David had cheated with, was actually our surrogate. That those boys were biologically his, yes, but supposedly part of my family, too. And that I had rejected them because I hated boys. The audacity, the cruelty, the sheer delusion of rewriting history to protect her son's image. And that was the breaking point. I realized something in that moment. If I stayed silent, if I let them spin this story unchecked, my daughters would never be free. Their reputation would be dragged through the mud. Their grief and trauma would be twisted into weapons. So I made a decision. If they wanted a story, I would give them the real one, and I had every shred of evidence I needed to burn their lies to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a second. I sat in my kitchen, the dim light above the sink humming faintly, a mug of coffee untouched beside me. My hands trembled not from fear anymore, but from something else. Resolve. For weeks I had been playing defense, blocking lies, dodging gossip, trying to shield my girls from the shame their grandparents wanted to pour on them. But that night, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to play defense anymore. I was going to build a case, brick by brick, fact by fact, until their entire house of lies collapsed on their heads. The first step was memory, painful memory. I dug out the old box I had shoved to the back of the closet years ago, the one filled with David's old phone records, my notes, from the divorce, photographs, receipts, messages, everything I had once thought too painful to keep, too messy to sort through. Now, they were weapons. One by one, I laid them out on the dining table. My daughters would have seen a chaotic pile of paper, but I saw patterns, timelines, proof. There were text messages where David called his mistress baby mama, emails where he argued with me about money he had secretly funneled to her, photographs of him with her at motels, handwritten letters from her demanding he choose between the two families, and then the birth certificates. The boys' birth certificates. My name wasn't on them. Her name was. Their DNA wasn't mine. The proof was right there, in black ink. This wasn't my shame. This wasn't my daughter's shame. This was his, and now it was going to become theirs. The second step was structure. If the church wanted scripture and sermons, then I would give them something they could understand. I bought 3 thick, leather-bound binders, the kind that resembled hymn books, and then, carefully, methodically, I began to fill them. Each binder was a chapter: the first, the affair; the second, the lies; the third, the aftermath. Inside, I organized everything: receipts, emails, photographs, even the divorce court documents. On every page, I added notes. Not emotional rants, not bitterness, just facts. Cold, undeniable facts. I wanted them to feel the weight of truth, the way I had felt the weight of their lies. Late at night, after the girls had gone to bed, I'd sit at the table with scissors, glue, and a heavy black marker. I highlighted dates, circled words, underlined contradictions, dotted tea times. The rage would bubble up. I'd slam the marker down so hard it left dents in the wood. But then I'd take a deep breath, whisper a prayer, not for peace, but for precision, and keep working. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The third step was timing. Exposing them in a private conversation would do nothing. They thrived on public image. They survived on reputation. If I confronted them alone, they would twist my words, flip the script, and play the victim again. No. This had to be public. It had to be undeniable. And it had to happen where their power was strongest, inside that very church. I began attending services again. Not every week, just enough to remind them I was there, enough to make them uneasy. I didn't speak much. I didn't argue. I just watched. I watched them whisper in the pews. I watched them parade their grief like a badge of honor. I watched them soak in the pity and sympathy, nodding solemnly as if they were the only victims. And while they smiled, I planned. One evening, after choir rehearsal, I stayed behind with Pastor James. He was a kind man, younger than most of the congregation, and though he often bent to the louder voices of his flock, he still carried a core of integrity. "Pastor," I said quietly, "I need a moment to speak during Sunday service." "Just a moment." He looked uneasy. "Rachel, you know your in-laws are struggling. Emotions are high. Are you sure that's wise?" I met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "I won't raise my voice. I won't spread rumors. I only want the truth to be heard. And I have the documents to back every word." He studied me for a long moment, then finally nodded. "One Sunday. But Rachel, keep it respectful." Respectful. Small laugh. That word almost broke me. But I bit my tongue and nodded. Respectful wasn't the goal. The goal was final. That week, I prepared like I was preparing for trial. I rehearsed my words aloud, pacing the living room after the girls went to bed. I imagined the gasps, the whispers, the shifting of bodies in the pews as their illusion shattered. And it caught me once, binder in hand, whispering under my breath. "Mom," she asked softly, rubbing her eyes, Are you really going to do this?" I sat down beside her, pulling her close. "Sweetheart, they try to rewrite our story. They try to make you feel guilty for existing, for grieving. If I don't do this, they'll keep doing it." Over and over, her eyes welled with tears. I just wanted to stop. I kissed her forehead. "That's exactly why I'm doing it." The night before Sunday, I barely slept again. But this time, it wasn't fear keeping me awake. It was anticipation. I could already hear the silence in that church when the truth landed. The silence that would spread like a crack through stained glass. The silence that would never again let them call me a liar. And when the sun rose, I knew the hymn books were ready. The truth was ready. And I was ready. Sunday morning dawned colder than usual. The kind of sharp chill that seeps into your bones even when the sun is out. I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing down my navy blue dress. Not flashy, not casual, serious. I wanted to look like a woman who had nothing left to prove, but everything left to protect. On the bed behind me, 3 binders sat neatly stacked. To anyone else, they looked like hymnals, but to me, they were a weapon, not of destruction, but of revelation. Anna and Lily watched me silently as we got ready. Lily tugged at my sleeve nervously. "Mom, are you sure about this?" What if they hate us even more after? I knelt down, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Sweetheart, sometimes people need to hate you in order to see the truth. We don't need their love. We just need our freedom. Anna, more stoic, crossed her arms. Good. Let's finish this. Their voices steadied me. I wasn't walking into that church alone. My daughters were with me. And for once, it wasn't them who had to be strong. It was me. The church smelled of old wood and candle wax, the kind of scent that carried decades of ritual and repetition. Families murmured as they filed in, coats brushing against pews, books thudding onto laps, and there they were, my ex-in-laws, Richard and Margaret, sitting in the second row like royalty. Martha clutched her Bible dramatically against her chest, as if holding onto it could somehow shield her from the lies she had woven. Harold kept his hand on her shoulder, giving everyone the image of a devoted husband and grieving grandfather. I felt my stomach twist. Rage simmered beneath my ribs, but I swallowed it down. No anger, no shaking voice, just facts. I waited until the opening hymn began. The congregation rose, voices rising in familiar harmony. People who had sung together for years, believing they shared truth and loyalty. That's when I slipped my binders onto the back table right where the extra hymnals were kept. Nobody noticed. Nobody questioned. Some members even reached for them absent-mindedly, flipping open the covers, expecting verses of grace and forgiveness, but what they saw instead were photographs, receipts, words scrawled in black ink. The gasps started small. Then they spread like wildfire. A woman to Rose a head stiffened. A man behind me whispered sharply, "Is that David?" I caught Martha's head jerk around. Her face drained of color. The hymn faltered. Voices wavered, notes falling flat. The organ stumbled to a halt as more people realized what they were holding. And then silence. Dozens of pairs of eyes turned toward me, toward Martha, toward Harold. Pastor James cleared his throat nervously. Perhaps we should. But I stepped forward before he could finish. My heels clicked against the wooden floor as I moved to the front of the church. My daughters sat in the pew behind me, their faces pale but determined. I turned to face the congregation. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. My name is Rachel Carter. Many of you know me as David Carter's wife, or, I suppose, his widow. You've heard a lot about me these past months. About my daughters. About the way we supposedly abandoned Richard and Margaret. About how I was bitter, cold, unchristian. I let the words hang in the air, heavy, daring anyone to deny them. Well, I thought it was time you saw the truth. Not my version, not theirs, just the truth. I gestured toward the binders. Every document, every message, every photograph in those books is real, verified, time-stamped, undeniable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked at Martha, who sat frozen, clutching her Bible tighter, her lips trembling. I continued, my voice steady but rising. David cheated on me for years. His parents, yes, Richard and Margaret knew. They supported him. They hid it. They even harassed my daughters, calling them names, blaming them for their father's death. They have painted themselves as victims while trying to destroy the only family David and I had together. I looked directly at Martha then. Her eyes widened, shimmering with fury and desperation. You claimed his mistress was my surrogate. You claimed those boys were mine. You told this congregation I abandoned children I never carried, that I rejected them because they were boys, that I left you penniless and homeless. My hands clenched at my sides, nails digging into my palms. But I forced my voice calm. But the truth is, David betrayed me, betrayed our daughters, betrayed this church's values, and you helped him do it. Gasps, whispers. Some people shook their heads. Others glared at Richard and Margaret, who sat red-faced, trembling with indignation. Martha finally stood, her voice shrill. Lies. She's twisting everything. She hates us. She's poisoning you against us. But before she could spew another word, a man from the choir held up one of the binders. I see your son's face clear as day, Martha. That's not her twisting anything. That's him. With another woman. In their own home, the crowd erupted. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel cornered. I felt powerful. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to beg. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. I looked at my daughters. Anna's lips trembled, but her eyes blazed with relief. Lily clutched her sister's hand, finally seeing the weight lift off both their shoulders. The congregation wasn't looking at us anymore. They weren't judging us, they were judging them. Martha sank back into her seat, her body trembling, her Bible slipping from her hands. Harold put an arm around her, but he looked pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. For once, they were silent, powerless, and I was free. The service ended in chaos. Pastor James tried to restore order, but it was impossible. People crowded around the binders, flipping through the evidence with wide eyes, muttering curses under their breath. Some avoided me. Others whispered, "I'm sorry," as they passed. 2 women even stopped me to press my hand, their eyes soft with apology. But the best part? The very people who had screamed at my daughter in the marketplace, who had called me unchristian, were now glaring daggers at Richard and Margaret. Their kingdom had crumbled. The days after that Sunday felt like stepping into a new world. For months, whispers had cut me down like knives. Every time I walked into the market, women turned their backs, men lowered their voices, children repeated the venom their parents had fed them. But now, when I passed through the square, the whispers were different. "Did you hear? Her husband." All those years, and Martha lied to everyone. People didn't turn their backs anymore. They didn't sneer. They looked away out of shame. Out of guilt, Martha and Harold vanished from the front pew. For years they had sat there like royalty, leading every prayer, every hymn. But the next Sunday, that seat was empty. I didn't see them at the bakery. I didn't see them at the butcher's. Their world had shrunk, caved in on itself, and in its place, my daughters and I breathed easier. One afternoon, a letter came. Thick paper, Harold's handwriting. I sat at the kitchen table, the girls watching nervously. As I opened it, "It wasn't an apology. Not really. It was begging us to stop, begging us to tell people it wasn't as bad as it looked, begging us to remember family." I laughed, a low, bitter sound I barely recognized as my own family. They had erased me. They had erased my daughters. They had turned neighbors into enemies, church into a courtroom. And now, stripped of their masks, they wanted mercy. I folded the letter neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and dropped it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. Some words, I told my daughters softly, don't deserve to survive. But it wasn't only about Martha and Harold. Something shifted in me after that Sunday. For so long, I had felt powerless, like life had been written without my voice. But when I stood in that church, binder in hand, daughters at my side, I realized something. The power had never been theirs to take. It had always been mine to claim. Weeks later, Anna asked me a question. "Mom, do you forgive them?" I paused. I was kneeling in the garden, hands deep in the soil, dirt under my nails. Life felt quieter now, softer. I looked up at her. She was taller now, her face sharper, but her eyes still searching, still fragile. "No," I said finally. "I don't forgive them. Forgiveness is an ode, and they've never asked for it honestly." Her lips pressed together, thoughtful. "Then what do you feel?" I wiped my hands on my apron, watching the clouds drift across the sky. "Peace. That's enough, because revenge isn't about screaming louder. It isn't about watching them burn. It's about reclaiming your silence. It's about breathing without their shadow pressing against your chest. It's about walking into a room, head high, knowing the truth is no longer hidden. Martha and Harold still live in this town, but they live as ghosts now, not because I destroyed them, but because they destroyed themselves. And I walk freely, with my daughters at my side, and a life that is finally mine again. I didn't take everything back in the way people might. Think. I didn't seize houses or money or titles. What I took back was far greater. I took back my name, my daughter's dignity, our place in this community. I took back the truth, and the truth, when it finally breathes, is stronger than any lie. So, to anyone listening, if you've ever been erased, betrayed, or silenced, remember this. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't shouting, it's walking away, with peace in your chest and nothing left to hide.